Hello and welcome to a special virtual interview of the inaugural Chicago Jewish Book Festival with Rabbi Michael Zedek. My name is Leah Jones. I currently serve as the president of Emanuel Congregation, but I was also one of the co-chairs of the Chicago Jewish Book Festival in 2023, and I'm very excited for this interview. Brook lyn-born Rabbi Michael Zedek is the founder and co-host of a weekly radio show, Religion on the Line, and a regular presenter at Rancho La Puerta, the oldest and most renowned spirituality spa center in North America. He currently serves as the Rabbi Emeritus of two congregations, Emanuel Congregation in Chicago and Congregation B'nai Jehudah in Kansas City. His new book, Taking Miracles Seriously, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality, is available for pre-order and will be shipping on September 20th, 2023, right between Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur. Rabbi Zedek, how are you doing?
My fault, by the way. I had nothing to do with that. That's the publisher. And boy, have I got a deal for you.
Yes.
If by some chance anybody would like to be convinced enough to order the book, if you go to SutherlandHouseBooks.com, that's Sutherland as in SUTHER, land, housebooks.com, and use Miracles 2023, you got a 20% discount. What a deal.
Amazing. What do we got to do to get you into this book today? How are you doing, Rabbi Zedek?
You have that same used car dealer?
I used to do sales for in marketing, so yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I learned how to do it.
My favorite, whoa, Mike, what will it take for me to get you this car today? Mm-hmm. The only people who call me Mike are people who don't know me.
Right.
I insist on Michael. And by the way, one small addendum to the magnificent biography that I've managed to accumulate in my 20 years is I am now the rabbi in residence at St. Paul's School of Theology, which is a United Methodist seminary. And it's a lot of fun for me to teach people who take religion seriously and have a different vocabulary. And forthrightly, one of the things that's fascinating in at least liberal Christianity, whatever the heck that term defines, they're trying to recover their Jewish DNA as opposed to their Greek philosophical background, which seems to have, first of all, that divides the world intellectually into body, soul, and usually body ain't so good, and soul
right.
is so I find students very, very interested in what we have to play with from a Jewish perspective. And they have a campus in Greater Kansas City and a campus in Oklahoma City.
Okay. So do you go back and forth, or do you meet with the Oklahoma?
Golly all over the place.
Yeah.
But I do go to the campus here in the Greater Kansas City area, but the Tulsa kids are kids. My God, they're not kids. But
yeah.
Anyway. All right, so I managed to distract us well enough to get started. Let's go.
Great. So, Rabbi Zedek, I know that this book was a work in progress for many years. I think you gave me a copy of the manuscript before COVID. And as much as my brain thinks that was a year ago, it was in fact
that's
3 or 4 years ago.
Time collapses or expands.
It really did.
Register, yeah.
So what's the story of this book coming together?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Rancho La Puerta, where I've had the wonderful privilege of being a presenter for a number of years. And it is a spirituality retreat center. And I suppose one could even say a place where people go for transitions in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And happens to be in Tecate, Mexico aside. The reason it's there as opposed to in the United States is that one of the two founders was a Hungarian Jewish refugee during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Get into the United States, as lo and behold, we don't really have room for this type of person. Mm-hmm. Still an issue in our culture, isn't it?
It is.
But one of the presentations that I would often offer at Rancho La Puerta was what I called Miracles of the Ordinary, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality, which was based on the idea that if you're at a spirituality retreat center, everybody knows when the extraordinary is happening. It slaps you across the face and says, wake up. But we don't need that slap because we recognize it.
Right.
But that which I think is critical is the recognition that the ordinary is also extraordinary if we would just pay attention. Or my cliche on this is that the aha is incredible, but everybody knows the aha is incredible. But the ho-hum is also and always aha. And that, I think, is a key to enriching the journey of life for whatever amount of time we're custodians of the gift of life. People would occasionally say, why do you write this up, et cetera. Now, I know because you spent more than a few weeks doing writing, aware definitively, it's a lonely business writing.
Yeah.
And I tended to be a jack of all trades and a person who thrived on the interaction with people. So it was hard to make or find or admit to creating the time to finish this work.
Right. Well, but also as a pulpit rabbi, you were writing fresh sermons and coming up with, there was so much writing as part of your weekly to-do list. To then set aside additional time to work on an outside project is a lot to ask from your schedule.
Well, it's ironic that you mentioned that, Leah, because when I finally said, you got to start getting this done and give it birth already, did a series of sermons that were the chapters.
Yeah.
On Shabbos morning, I would present and get feedback from the congregation.
Yep.
Now, the book has evolved since then in terms of the editor's input, because one of the things that was absolutely fascinating in terms of the editorial process, what was clear and obvious to me, because I know the argot of my world, to an editor who knew nothing about Judaism or religion, because it's not a Jewish only book, although clearly a lot of the stuff comes from the fact that Judaism has a lot to offer in this area. She was unaware of so many of the categories. It was really helpful because that made me have to be clearer that I already thought was very clear. And then a couple of years ago, before I retired, I guess it was after I retired. I don't know. I don't remember. Years just don't register.
They don't make sense anymore.
I spent 6 weeks as the quote unquote scholar in residence for the liberal Jewish community in Florence, Italy. So every morning I worked on finishing the book. In the afternoon, I would take a nice long walk and then have an outrageously long lunch and then teach. So that was fun. And that's when the book got sort of finished, although now the editorial process done and it's ready to see the light of day. And there is a scary piece to that.
Yeah.
There are moments when I read what I've written and said, wow, this is really good stuff. There are moments when I read exactly the same chapter and say, oh my God, this is drivel. And of course, the anxiousness, and I think the author will admit, is to be out there metaphorically naked and have no opportunity to get the interaction with the reader. Right. Is a scary thing.
Yeah, it's very different than delivering these as sermons and talking to Shifra and Devorah and our congregation and the people that you've known for 20 years and who know you and know your shortcuts and know all the sermons that came before. It's a very different.
Know that if I really mess up, it's just a mess up. It's not the end of the world.
Right, right. So the editor, does she usually work on spiritual books, or she has kind of a wide variety, and this for her was like her different?
Her PhD is in education.
Okay.
It had nothing to do with spirituality, other than we all have something to do with it, even if it's ignoring the issue because we don't want to confront something in our lives.
Yeah.
So again, enormously helpful, at least from my perspective.
Yeah. Was this one of your first times working with an editor?
I don't think it was one of. I think it was the shahaki out moment for working with an editor.
Wow.
Well, no, I take it back. Many years ago, I wrote a chapter on a book. I'm looking up at it. That's called Religion and Mental Health. And
Mm-hmm.
that chapter was, guess what, on Judaism.
Yep.
And the very modest editorial input was mainly about commas and
Mm-hmm.
this particular editor's absolute conviction that a sentence should never begin with the word FOR, which I don't agree with at all.
Right.
At any rate, that was about that's as far as I can recall, that's the only other experience with an editor other than the possibility of sharing a sermon in draft with my wife and getting her input.
Mm-hmm.
She's a good editor.
Yeah. So I'm curious, in the description of what was that?
I hope so.
I'm trying to bring it back, bring curiosity back. So in the blurb for the book, it talks about that you are drawing on a range of materials, including biblical tales, Indian and Japanese folklore, the works of St. Augustine, Einstein, Isaac Bashevis Singer, Groucho Marx. And one of the things I always loved about your sermons and loved about learning from you and would tell people when they would come to services was I was like, think about your favorite English professor who could just draw on, you have this magnificent well of poetry and literature and anecdotes, and you are able to draw on them and connect them to the parsha, connect them to current events. And so how did you even start to whittle it down for a book? Because I feel like you have such a deep well of literature just at your fingertips.
I sure hope this is being recorded because I want to keep that for my, no, I'm kidding, for my archive. That was, thank you, Leah. And in fact, there's at least a part of me that would love to believe that what you said is true. And there is a part of me that believes it. As it happens, before I became a rabbi, I did teach English and writing. So a little bit of that background never escaped from me and maybe comes out of me. I never thought that, well, I'll reframe that. Somebody once said, if you haven't struck oil in 20 minutes, quit boring. And so I tend to speak briefly, in fact, anecdote. A wonderful rabbinic colleague who grew up in Kansas City during the time I was the rabbi at B'nai Jehudah. His mother died. He had a congregation on the East Coast. And he came in for the service, of course, and he asked me to officiate it because he wanted to be a mourner, not the rabbi. And, and he stayed through the week, and he came to Friday evening services at B'nai Jehudah in Kansas City. And I got a note from him after he went home, thanking me for my help and saying, I was really stunned. You spoke Friday evening for 18 minutes and 10 seconds. And you said something. Now, the first thing is, what the 18 minutes and 10 seconds? What in the world? So I called him. So, well, I had just gotten one of the first digital watches. So I thought I'd keep time for the sermon. A. B. He spoke for 45 minutes every Friday night.
Oh my gosh.
I cannot imagine. That was the new in a previous generation. But now I think it's even less than 18 minutes for people to be able to sit still and actually hear something. The other thing I was constantly aware of is people don't remember essays. They remember illustrations and examples. So I was always constantly searching for stories, illustrations. I love poetry, so poems that can somehow capture our imagination, even when we don't want it captured. Or here's my little cliche about stories. In addition to being able to remember them, stories often outflank our resistance to change and or remind us what we need to do even when we don't want to do it. And if I can belabor this ever so slightly, because I may as well tell a story. I learned this in a very dramatic way for me. as you may recall, I tried very hard not to repeat a story. And if I did, I say, some of you may remember. So get those folks on my side, like,
Yeah.
Read me the story again, Daddy. And I used in a Yom Kippur sermon many years ago an image from the Talmud about a certain rabbi who's one of the most minor figures in the Talmud. His name is Rabbi Nathan. He appears twice, which is to say he's not terribly important. But
his future was in hot dogs.
Yeah. I used the story at the end of a Yom Kippur morning sermon a year earlier than what I'm about to share. I'm meeting with, actually, it was 3 years earlier. I'm meeting with a group of 12 and almost 13-year-olds to prepare them for their bar and bat mitzvah. And I began to tell this story because I think it's a wonderful job description for what it is to be part of Jewish life. And several of the kids were saying, "Oh, Rabbi, let me tell it." Now, of course, to be egomaniacal, they couldn't tell it nearly as well as I, but the fact they remembered the story was so impactful that I literally didn't forget it, and that's why I'm spending time on it right now. The story is this. The rabbis in the academy, the Sanhedrin, are debating whether or not we should go to the gladiatorial combats of ancient Rome. Of course, they indicate absolutely not. We must stay away from such barbarity. Then Rabbi Nathan, for the first time, opens his mouth and says, "No, we have to go." So before they want to throw him out, they say, "Mahasiba, what's your reasoning?" And he says, "Well, when the crowd shouts for the blood of the defeated gladiator and goes thumbs down, our job is to shout thumbs up." And, I think that's incredible. Incredible in a world in which it's so easy to just throw up our hands. There's nothing we can do. It's useless. It's hopeless. We're described as prisoners of hope. And I can't imagine a better thing to be captured by than hope. Especially in a world that is too easily leading down a road to despair. It's also a story.
It reminds me of when we were protested by Westboro Baptist Church. And I think the leaders in ECRA, which is the Edgewater Religious Council, came to you and said, "What are you going to do?" And you said, "Nothing. What are you going to do?" And the counter protest, the people who came to give their thumbs up against this hate group, was overwhelming. It was such an incredible turnout.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. For those who may not, Westboro Baptist Church was a very small group of bona fide haters based in Topeka, Kansas. And we were informed that they were going to picket Emanuel. They had started off God hates Jews. Then they switched to God hates homosexuals. And then they went back to God hates Jews. And my own thought was, if they're protesting God hates Jews and the Jews on the other side of the street are saying, "No, God doesn't," that's not exactly sensible. But I say, this is not my fight. This is yours. And as I recall, it was close to 900 people surrounded our congregation versus the 7 people on the other side of the street. And it was a wonderful and extraordinary moment because, well, one of the initiatives I'm playing with right now is the challenge of, hatred is loose in our land in remarkable ways. In ways we all thought maybe we're simply confined to the dustbin of history. It ain't necessarily so. But I never liked motorcycles. But as you may recall, Rolling Thunder was this group that would disrupt Westboro Baptist Church and he called himself Dr. Fred Phelps, group by blurring out their sound by the roar of their Harley Davidsons. Round and round the block. I had a new appreciation for motorcycles, I got to admit. And what I'm reminded of is there was a rabbi by the name of Joachim Prinz. He was a refugee from Nazi Germany, just as our wonderful and beloved and late Rabbi Herman Schaumann and Lada, his wife. And he spoke at the March on Washington. The next speaker was a guy named Martin Luther King Jr. So nobody remembers what Prince said.
Yeah.
But what he said is of the moment. He said, Hitler's great genius was that he made it possible for people to collaborate in murder simply by doing nothing.
Mm,
There's too many of us. It's not my problem.
yeah.
I don't need to do anything. We got too many nothing doers.
Yeah.
But that's a sermon rather than about the book.
But it gives people a taste of what is going to come through in the book, like the way that you use stories, anecdotes to then pull through a more spiritual message.
Well, I hope that's true. That's the intent, although I suspect I didn't intend to have that intent. It's just who I am.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it now as fun, even though it was oftentimes excruciating and challenging and maybe even a little painful.
Mm-hmm.
And then every so often that experience that athletes often talk about as flow, and it just, and the time disappears, and and you're just moving and moving and moving and filled with enthusiasm, which is really a wonderful word. You've heard me say it comes from the Greek enthusiasmos. It means to be full of God.
Mm. When you were writing the book, because I remember you don't love to type.
I don't know how.
So you would do a lot of, you would use dictation, and you would write longhand. Just when the experience of writing this book, was this a longhand, or how did you get it done? What were the mechanics of getting a book done when you don't know how to type?
Just a second. These things.
Yes.
And I suspect that, well, it was written in longhand. Mm-hmm. And then I had a voice activated dictation system. Yeah. And I would then, after reading and rereading and editing, do it. And then that became the manuscript, which then to the publisher. By the way, I should mention, my title was Miracles of the Ordinary, A Journey to Spirituality. The book agent changed it to Hiding in Plain Sight, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality. And the publisher, who was the person who calls the shots, is why it's called Taking Miracles Seriously, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality. That's an ironic, because I would think some people say taking miracles seriously must mean that miracles happen. And one of the things that the book points out is just about every person, if you'd ask them in the English language to give a definition of miracle, they'd say some kind of supernatural intervention into the regular routine of experience. Right. There's no such word for that in the Hebrew Bible. There are words that we translate into English as miracle, but they don't mean that. May I go on? Of course you may go on. The most common words are three. Nes, which is translated miracle, but it means a sign or a symbol, a flag. Ot, which is literally the Hebrew word for a letter, like a letter of the alphabet, symbol. And Pella, which is my favorite, which means a wow or an amazement. And so, seriously, if we have our eyes alert to the burning bushes scattered randomly through every day, and I may as well end this with Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poem. Earth's crammed with heaven, and every bush is afire with God. Only he who sees takes off his shoes. And there's more to the poem, but I'll stop there, because my hope is that the book is a way for us to see more of the burning bushes that are there every day, if we would just have new eyes or renewed vision. Yeah, I think I might write a book about that. Yeah. That's beautiful, Rabbi Zedek. Well, thank you very much. Okay, I'll tell you. The book has got 3 parts. Okay. The first part is based on the awareness that one ought to take from the Bible, the Hebrew Bible. Every time what you or I would call a miracle occurs, no one draws what should be the obvious lesson that we're protected, God's in charge, all is well. over and over again, the people don't get it.
Yeah.
Or put it in a poetic fashion. Days pass, years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles. They did, and we do.
Mm-hmm.
The second part is an effort to try to how can we speak about God seriously if we don't have a God who does all that Santa Claus-like stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And the third part is how prayer and poetry can unlock some of this mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Or is that another anecdote? I don't know if this is in the book. It probably is. Yes, it is. There's a story that's told about Robert Frost and the cottage he maintained on a lake in Vermont. Now, truthfully, I don't know if he had a cottage in Vermont on a lake, but a good anecdote shouldn't be spoiled by facts. He's being interviewed by a graduate student who's doing her PhD work on Frost. They're having dinner, and the graduate student notices the exquisite sunset. She brings it to Frost's attention and says, I make it a point never to discuss business while I'm eating. Now, and that sort of is the introduction to the notion. Poetry only works if it unlocks what we already know, but just it's inchoate in us, and the poet articulates it so that it responds, or to put it in simple terms, it takes two to tango, and it also takes two to make a poem work. And some of the poems, self-evidently, Mary Oliver is in there because the simplicity and beauty of her insights are worth celebrating and worth incorporating. And then there's an appendix with a useless part of a body, right? And that's about it, in addition to a lot of footnotes.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, one of the things, so people listening to this may not know, that I converted to Judaism, and I studied with you when I converted. And one of the early,
I bet you know, when we went for that walk on Sheridan Road, that it was going to cost you so much of involvement.
Yes. It was I did not know what was coming. I'm glad it all happened, though.
I'm delighted to played a part in that journey for you.
But I would say one of the things that first spoke to me about Judaism was, I talk about it as it provided like a scaffolding and a library and words that I had grown up with a mishmash of lessons, which I said was now I know it was secular Christianity, but I didn't have that language at the time. But we didn't really grow up in church, but we went to church sometimes. And that Judaism, like if you look at the death and grieving process, provides the structure for one of the worst times in your life, and also provides the words. When I think about my friends who are Christian, it seems to me that more Christian prayer is extemporaneous, and you have to come up with the words yourself. And in Judaism, one of the gifts of Judaism is that the words are given to us, and you can rely on the meditative rhythm of Kaddish, or in the structure of Shiva and Shloshim and Yartzites. And I think it's a religion and a tradition that gives us the structure for those times when you just can't move forward. And I think that when you bring a layer of poetry on top of that structure, it becomes really powerful, because the Kaddish is as this beautiful rhythm, and it's in Aramaic, and it's a beautiful meditation, and you can really get lost in it. But for a lot of lay people, it's the rhythm that feels something. We don't know what it's saying. So I think the addition of poetry, of Mary Oliver, of these anecdotes, then make the words we've been given to say in those moments more powerful.
Well, while I find myself comfortable in what you said, I do want to offer a devar acher, an additional interpretation, because Christianity does have the Lord's Prayer,
Right.
and it does have various creedal statements which we don't have. Intentionally, by the way, we don't have them, and then it also can call upon both our Bible and its New Testament for reflections and things. Embrace comfort and challenge, because one of the things I love about my tradition is it's not just a place to be comfortable, it's also a place to be challenged.
Yeah.
And then I do think there's something important in the multiplicity of words in Jewish prayer, because I think ironically, it's a way of saying no words are adequate to convey the language of the heart and language when it's directed to the highest we can imagine. So here's my contrast. In Eastern tradition, you may be familiar with the notion of Om, which is sometimes understood to be the background noise of the universe.
Okay.
And it certainly causes the body to vibrate, which is in and of itself interesting, since all we are is another manifestation of the energy that all life shares. The danger is that you will think it's an important word rather than a non-word, that only by saying this can I connect. In Jewish tradition, and maybe in Western tradition, given the clear understanding that nothing is adequate when we're describing what we mean by ultimate reality, we throw lots of words on it because it's more likely that you'll realize how inadequate they are. And the Kaddish is the perfect example, because as you know, a whole series of synonym after synonym after synonym, which has got to be a way of saying nothing is adequate to say, because otherwise, why do you need them all? Now, the other piece of the puzzle for me, I don't believe for a moment that the God that I take seriously needs my prayers. Prayer is not for God, it's for me. To open me to that which is there and around me and in me always, or to use my bromide, there's a sacred dimension around us, there's holiness in us, now let's get to work. Or as Rabbi Morris Adler, blessed memory, used to say, one who rises from prayer a better person, that person's prayer is answered. And that's probably among the reasons why prayer suffers. First of all, because very few people really want to be challenged to get to grow, even though we claim we do. And second, it requires us to put down some of the things that we've always grown fond of, accustomed to, in order to grow. So prayer, meditation, poetry, I think those are key forms for getting in touch with what makes this journey more than a sentence to endure. Boy, I hope this interview is being recorded.
It is being recorded. It is being recorded.
I know.
There's some good things in here, Rabbi Zedek. I also, so for people who are getting excited to pre-order your book, I think they'll find, I know they will find in it the anecdotes that they can take with them when they set the book down, because that's what, as a congregant, there were many Yom Kippurim in a row where I would sit there and I'm like, okay, you can hold on to this coal in your hand, this grudge. Like, is this going to be the year that you set it down? And I would think that is like what I think about when I'm in services, is this story that you had told about, you know, like when you're holding grudges and you're holding on to past arguments, and that it's the equivalent of holding a coal in your hand and it's only burning you. It's not burning the person you're angry at. And some of the big hurts, like, can this be the year that I set it down and offer forgiveness? Or can I this be at least the year I set it down if I can't get to forgiveness yet.
Yeah.
And so I know that for me, this is the power of how you use stories as a rabbi, is that I'm able to, 20 years after hearing you use that analogy, really think about, like, is there a benefit to me carrying this around? And I think I get through, and now especially on the other side of cancer treatment, boy, do I put the burning rocks down a lot faster now. Like, I just do not have the energy for anything that makes me, I'm just like not interested in carrying grudges forward, or I'm less interested. I'm not perfect.
Well, we are all works in progress.
Yeah.
And the question is, are we making progress, or are we? And I don't doubt for a moment what side of that equation you're on. But I am, credit where credit is due. I heard that story from Rabbi Harold Kushner, who died recently, and I would not want someone to think I invented it. I did not. There's a wonderful rabbi, by the name of Rabbi Jack Reamer. He's a great storyteller. And I once had a sermon published in which I used an image that I borrowed from him. And I specifically asked them to say my debt to for the image. And in fact, if you want, I'll even tell people what the image was. And they didn't put that in when they published the sermon.
Oh, no.
And so I happened to run into him at a meeting, and I said to him, Jack, I don't know if he had seen the sermon, and he thought it was really good, by the way. And I said, but I had specifically asked that they acknowledge that this image came from you. And he said, he quoted the Talmud, Hagonev miganav patur. One who steals from a thief is exempt. But so the image, I think it was the 25th anniversary of the State of Israel, and they had a concert at the foot of Mount Masada that was led by the Israel Philharmonic, and Zubin Mehta conducting. And there were sections divided into patriarchs, kings, and prophets. The sermon conceit was, if I could have afforded a ticket, which section would I have sat in? And so listen, you don't want to sit with the prophets. They probably disrupt the concert, right? Don't want to sit with the kings because King David might snake my date. Yeah. And I don't want to sit with the patriarchs because Jacob might steal my purse. You know. So then the turn, which made it my sermon. Oh, by the way, I came up with those images. It was his image about the concert. Was, if I could choose to be there, next to whom would I want to sit? And it was a sermon, and the answer was my father. Of course, yeah. And how I wished he and I could have the conversations we never got to have. It's one of the ones I remember. But I said, at no additional charge, your story about putting things down reminded me of a story from Zen tradition. A chief monk and his apprentice are out for a walk in the Japanese countryside after a very heavy rain. They come to a stream where the ford would normally be able to be crossed, but the current from the rain is running so harshly and strong that a woman of very modest stature is waiting because she can't cross. Without missing a moment, the master picks her up and carries her across the stream, which is a violation of his responsibilities of having no contact with the opposite sex as a Zen tradition monk. The student says nothing. They walk along for 6 hours, according to one version of the story, saying nothing. Until, of course, with the mystery that's always at the heart of a Zen story, the master turns to the student and says, "What's troubling you?" He says, "The woman at the stream. How could you do that?" He said, "Oh, her? I put her down hours ago. You should also." Same story, different context. Yep.
Wonderful. Rabbi Zedek, is there anything about the book launch? Now you will be, I'm very grateful, back in Chicago for High Holy Days.
That's God willing, as we say in the business.
Yes.
Planned.
And the book comes out smack dab in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
Mhm.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about the book that you want to make sure you say or share? We'll make sure that the pre-order information is available to people. Pre-orders are important, folks.
Yeah.
You're
So
already climbing the Amazon charts.
it is available for pre-ordering on Amazon, but if you act today and go instead to sutherlandhousebooks.com, and it's taking miracles seriously, and at the end you enter the code miracles 2023, you get 20% off.
Wonderful.
I think Amazon is selling it for $18.95, something like that.
Mhm.
It is, as books go, it's not expensive. And I had nothing to do with designing the cover. It's kind of shining, but I really like it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, originally they made it into a burning tree. I said, no, it's a bush.
Got a bush. It's got to be a bush.
But that's the story, and I'm sticking to it. And I'm way beyond grateful for this chance to discuss it with one of my favorite people, and she's the other person in this discussion. So,
Well, thank you, Rabbi Zedek. And I will have a wonderful summer.
that you too, and if things hold well, I'll see you in September. And I don't want to lose you to anything.
Outstanding.